Okay, so first let's talk about how to configure Apache. So to configure Apache, we use text-based configuration files. The main one is httpd.conf. Okay, all we do is we enter things called directives, which are just text-based settings that we can put into these files. And we limit the scope of these directives using what? What do we use to limit the scope? Containers, exactly. So we use containers to limit the scope. So give me some examples of containers that you talked about. So you can have a directory container, for example. Okay, what else? File, yes. There's also location. These containers just look like HTML tags or XML tags, where you open up the container with an opening tag and you close it with the same word with a closing tag. Okay, so let's log into our Ubuntu image and just look at the default settings of the configuration. So again, user, password to log in. Okay, so we're going to be doing a lot of modification of text files today. So it'd be very useful if we had some sort of text editor with syntax highlighting and easy searching and stuff like that. So the one I'm going to use today is called Vim. It's similar to VI, but it has some syntax highlighting included. So what I'll do first is I'm going to install Vim using the package manager. So all you have to write is sudo apt-get install Vim. Okay, I already have it installed. I misspelled sudo. I already have it installed, but you can run that command as well to install it on your own machine.
It takes quite a while.
It takes quite a while. Okay, so I'll wait for you guys to install it. In the meantime, for those of you that have it installed, just go into the Apache folder. So user, local, Apache 2. Okay, and we're going to be dealing with the conf folder today, CONF. And here we have our main configuration file, httpd.conf. So what I'll do is, let me just make this full screen so it's easier to see. So I'm going to open up httpd.conf just to take a look at what's inside the file. So you can see there's a bunch of comments which describe what the directives do. So you can see the first directive we run into is called server root. So this defines the root of the server, where the server is located. And each of these directives has a comment above, and there's a warning to not just simply modify these directives without knowing what they do, without just reading these comments. So let's take a brief look here. We have a listen directive. So if we look at the comment above, it allows you to bind Apache to a specific IP address and or port. So that's the first directive we'll be changing. There's some load module directives. And you'll notice some of them are all blue, and the other ones are blue with some gray text. So the ones that are all blue are commented out. So we use the hashtag to comment out in the configuration files that we'll be looking at. Then there's some if module containers, a directory container, which is the root. Then we have our web root container, document root. Okay, so we'll take a look at these in greater detail in a second. Have you guys downloaded Vim already?
It takes too much time.
It takes too much time. Okay, I'm going to exit this guy for now. While you're downloading Vim, I'll show you where the references for the directives. So if you'd ever like to learn more about these directives, which I encourage you to do so, go to https://httpd.apache.org/docs/2.4/mod quick reference.html. So this link is inside your lab manual. It's the first one listed there, and this will give you a breakdown of what each of the directives do, which module they belong to. So for example, the first one we'll be dealing with today is called listen. So let's look for the listen directive. Here it is. So let's read the description. The listen directive instructs Apache HTTPD to listen to only specific IP addresses or ports. Okay, ours by default is listen 80, so that's the port that we're listening to. So what we'll do, the first thing that we'll change is we'll change the port that Apache listens to. So someone pick a number. 18. Okay, hopefully that's not a reserved port. So we'll check in a sec. So what I'm going to do first is access my, I'm going to exit this configuration file. And we'll write out if config to see which IP I'm listening to. So I'm listening to 192.168.159.128. So you can do the same thing on yours to see which IP you're listening to. And let's enter that IP into a browser. See what happens. So here's my browser. So I'm looking for 192.168.159.128. Okay, so nothing happens. Why not? I started my image, there's my IP. What did I forget to do?
You need to start
Exactly. I have to start Apache for it to listen. So how do we start Apache? It's inside the bin folder. So user /local/Apache2 bin Apache control start. Okay. So let's try again. Okay, so this is our page from last time. So it works and I can modify it. Good. So the default port that we're adding here is 80. So okay, so the default port that we're listening to is 80. We don't put it into the URL, the address bar of our browser. If we go to back to Ubuntu and we modify the configuration file, you can look for something in Vim with the backslash. So backslash and what you're looking for. So I'm looking for the listen directive, and to look for the next occurrence of the listen word. So there it is, listen 80. So that's the port I'm currently listening to. Let me make this full screen here. So this is the port that I'm currently listening to. So I'm going to modify this port to 18, someone suggested. That might be a reserved port. So to start typing in Vim, press I. I will enter text mode and you can insert characters. Okay, so here I'm going to write 18. And escape to exit text mode. This is called command mode. And from here, if we want to save the file, just type colon. You can see at the bottom, little colon appears. And you can enter commands there. So to write the file, it's W. To quit, it's Q. You can do two at once, WQ. So it says that it's written and I've quit. Yes?
Oh, the way you search for the word that you wanted is how?
Backslash. So the slash beside the question mark. And just type in the word. N for next occurrence of the word you're looking for, and P for previous. Keep in mind it's case sensitive. So if you're looking for listen, it's got to be capital L.
So you got to go Vim? You got to type Vim the name?
Yeah, Vim, and then the file that you want to edit. If you're inside the configuration directory, you can just type HTTP and then tab. It'll complete it for you. If you're not inside the directory, it's /user/local/Apache2/conf httpd.conf. Okay, just make sure that you have admin privileges. So type sudo su before this or sudo vim. Otherwise, it's a read-only file. Okay, so after we make any changes to the configuration file, it's important to restart Apache. Otherwise, the changes won't be reflected. So the way we restart Apache is we just use the Apache controls inside the bin folder. So /bin/Apache-ctl restart. Yes?
To get out of typing mode.
Yes. Escape.
Escape.
To get out of typing mode, you press escape.
Okay. And then W.
And then colon.
Colon.
And WQ. W is to write, Q is to quit.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is restart the server. I just did. It looks like 18 might be available because I didn't have any errors. Let's try. So now if I try to access it from port 80, nothing happens. So I get web page is not available. What we're going to do now is append port 18. And now it's listening to port 18 only. Okay, so we've modified which port we're listening to. So Some of you may have noticed that in the labs, in C416, C418, I think even in these ones, XAMPP is running on 800 on Windows. So that's how we made it run on 800. You just modified the Apache directive, listen, and change the port to 800. Okay, so what we're going to do is modify it back to 80. So I'm just going to vim httpd.conf. So I'll go through the process again. I'm going to press backslash. See at the bottom of the screen a little backslash appears. I'm going to look for listen. That's the directive I'm looking for. And I press N to just search through Vim. Here's the one that I modified. I'm just using the arrow keys to navigate. When I'm in the right area, I can press I to insert. We'll change this back to 80. Then I'm going to press escape, :WQ. This W writes the file, Q quits.
Is it gonna save it or not?
Yes, W is to write the file, so W saves it. Q is to quit. You can just do W if you like, or just Q, but we did them at the same time. Okay, now again, for this to work, I have to restart Apache. So I've restarted Apache. Let's just go back and check. So on port 18, it's no longer listening to that port, but if I go back to the default port 80, it works. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Yeah, when we're going to edit the file,
Yes.
it allows me to delete the port number, but I can't enter in a port number.
You can't enter in a port number. Okay, so let's see. What are you trying to write here?
When I open the file with this,
Yeah.
it's just like E for edit.
I for edit. Yeah.
So
Oh, you already have it open somewhere. So just abort this one, or open anyway. So E is edit anyway.
and then so if I get to it, it'll allow me to delete so here's a port.
Yeah. So type.
If I try to type it in, yeah, it doesn't take. But I
So-
can
Okay, you can delete, but you have to press I to start typing, and now you can write stuff. When you finish typing, press escape.
edit mode.
Yeah, there's an edit mode and a command mode. Okay, so there's a few links to Vim tutorials inside the lab manual. So I encourage you to check out the tutorials. It talks about how to edit inline or at the end of the line. Yes. Sorry? Okay, did you start Apache? Can you start right now? Yeah, go ahead. So permission denied. You have to make sure you're sudo. So make sure you're in sudo. Password. Oh, you already put it in? Okay, now press up. Or just right over. Okay, yeah, start it. Okay, now try it. Okay. All right, so if you're starting Apache, remember you have to have administrative privileges in order to start Apache. Okay. Any questions about modifying the listen directive? Let me just pause the recording here. So what we should have done first before we change the listen directive, it's okay because we changed it back to what it was. We should make a backup of the configuration file before we start doing any crazy changes. So someone's nodding. They've already done that. So let's do that. Let's make a copy of httpd.conf to http.conf.back or whatever extension, something that will allow you to just look at it and realize that it's a backup. It's not the original one. Sorry?
In the same directory?
In the same directory, yes.
So the next step is a listen directive.
Sorry?
The next step of what we're doing now is a listen directive.
We just did the listen directive, yeah. So we're going to do some authentication and authorization.
Okay.
Okay. So I've made a backup to my httpd.conf. So now that we're going to do some more changes, if we mess anything up by accident, we can just revert to our previous configuration. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up some password protected areas of our page. So this requires a few steps. We need a password file that stores a digest of our password, a user, a few Apache directives, as well as a directory in our web root that we'd like to protect. So what we'll do is we'll just create, let's go to our web root. So our web root is in htdocs. So I have a few folders there. I'm just going to remove the old folders. So you can follow along. Okay, so all I have is my index file. So the steps that I'm going to go through is I need to create a directory that I want to protect. I'll put some index file in there that describes that this is a protected directory. We need to create a password file. After we've created the password file, we have to make a directory that points to the password file and says that this directory is protected by that password file. Okay, so I'll start by making the directory. So we'll call this one restricted. Okay, so if I cd into my restricted directory, I can just make a very simple HTML index file that just says this area is restricted. So I'm just going to write out that statement into index.html. So I'm just using the greater than symbol to create that file. So now I have an index.html. If I cat the contents of that, it just says this area is restricted. Okay, so just to show you that this is actually working, let's go to our browser and go to /restricted. And you can see that it just has text that says this area is restricted. So indeed it is a location in our web root. Okay, now what we're going to do is protect this with a password. So Apache comes with a binary that allows you to create a user file, or that stores a username and a digest of the user's password. So the password binary is located inside the binary directory. So let's go to the binary directory. Okay, so it's called htpassword. That's the file we're looking for. And the syntax of the command is we're going to call it htpassword. Since we're creating a new file, we're going to give it a flag of -c to create. Let me make this larger so you can see. So -c to create. Then the path that we'd like to save the password file into. At the end, we put the file name.
Can I use an instead of pen?
Sorry?
Can I use an instead of pen?
You can, yeah. You can use any text editor you like.
Because I'm not sure about that.
That's fine. I'm going to use Vim though. Okay. So we're looking for htpassword. So like I said, the first flag is C. So I'll show you how to call it. So htpassword.
Will you open it then?
Sorry?
You're going to open it?
I'm not going to open it. It's an executable, so I'm just going to call it. So /htpassword. I'm calling a program. And I'm passing in some command line arguments. So -c creates a new file. Okay. The next argument is where I want to create the new file. So you can put it anywhere you like. You just have to remember where you put it. So I'm just going to put it inside the configuration directory. So user/local Apache2 conf, and we'll call this one .ht_users. Okay, the reason I call it ht_users, I'll show you in a sec. There's a directive inside Apache's config, inside httpd.conf. It doesn't allow Apache to serve .ht* files. So any files that follow this pattern, Apache can't serve, so it's a safe way to save passwords, ht_users. Okay, and then the next argument that we're going to pass in is the username that we'd like to create. So I'm just going to use my name. So Rafael will be the username. You can use your name. Then it'll prompt you for a password twice. So enter in your password. So I'm just going to write password. I think I had a typo there. Okay. So it looks like it worked. If I show you where the file is, so if we go to cat, I'm going to cat out the file /user/local Apache2 conf.ht_users. It just has the username followed by a hash of the password.
Also, it's encrypted?
It's encrypted, yeah. So it doesn't store it in plain text. Similar to a Unix password file. Okay, so again, remember where this password file is located. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a container inside of our httpd.conf, a directory container, and we'll put all of the directives that require password inside there. So So let's go to the conf directory. Let's, I'm going to vim httpd.conf. So I'm inside the configuration file. Okay, so we can create a new directory container. You can press GG in Vim to get to the bottom of the file. So I'm just going to append it to the very bottom. Sorry, it's capital G to get to the bottom. So Shift G. Hold Shift and press G. It'll take you to the bottom of the file. I to insert. So I'm going to create a new directory container. And the next argument is the path. So /user /local /apache2 /htdocs /restricted. Okay, here's my directory. I'm going to close the container. So this directory container means that any directives I enter inside there, I'll move it up so you can see. Any directives that I enter inside there,
That's in the httpd.conf.
.conf. That's correct. Yes, any directives I enter inside there are confined to this directory. So it limits the scope of the directives. Okay, and the directives that we'll be using is authentication type. So auth type. So we'll do basic. Auth name. So what's the label that you give to your login screen? So we'll just say this area is restricted. The important one is auth user file. So this directive says, where is the password file located that you just created with the htpassword binary? So this one was in /user /local /apache2 /conf /.ht ht users. Sorry. Okay, and the last one tells us what is required to enter. So here we can put in a bunch of usernames, but we'll just say a valid user. So someone that can authenticate with the user file that we've provided is allowed to enter. Okay, so that's all we need. So I'm just going to write that. Again, to exit configuration mode is escape:W, and to quit is escape:Q. So once again, if you're having trouble reading what's on the board here, just follow along in week 3 lab manual. I'm on step B7 right now. B7. Okay, so I'll quit this. And what do I have to do now after I've made changes to the configuration file?
Restart.
Yeah, I got to restart Apache. So bin Apache control restart. Okay, I've restarted. So now let's go back to our browser that we logged in before, and let's try the restricted area. Now it asks me for a password. Okay, so username and password. Again, this is the username and password that you entered inside the htpassword binary flags. So mine was Rafael, and password. Nope. And I'm allowed in. Okay, so some of you might remember that all of your GB Learn accounts are password protected in the same way.
This is how it works.
This is how it works. Right. So now you can. Sorry?
So if you wanted to set up a server at home with all of your school files that you can access with friends, that's how you would do it.
Yeah, this is one way to do it. Yeah. Without using a server-side programming language with sessions, you can do it with just Apache. And you can add multiple usernames to this password file. So in the htpassword binary, we use the -c flag that creates a new file. So if you wanted to add more users to that password file, in fact, let's do that now. We wouldn't use the -c flag. We would just so let's go to the binary folder. So again, what we're looking for is the htpassword binary. Okay, so we wouldn't use -c. We would point to the file that we want to append the password to. So in this case, it would be /user local apache2 configuration .ht users. And then we have the username that we want to add. So let's say I want to add my friend John. Okay, and John's password is something different. If I cat out the file now, so there's 2 users now, Rafael and John. Okay, so both of them have access to that folder. Oh, you can't see that. So if I cat out the file, I have two users there, Rafael and John. And if I go back to my restricted area and I'll start a new session here, and I'll try to log in with John. John also has access. Okay, any questions about this? Any issues implementing it?
Where's the HT users file supposed to be?
It's up to you, but I put it in user local Apache 2 conf, so in the configuration directory. The same folder as httpd.conf is in. You can put it wherever you like as long as you specify the absolute path inside the directive.
Is there a log file that tells you time, dates, and IP?
There is. Yeah, we'll get into log files next week, but there are log files that you can. There's access logs and error logs. So the access logs will tell you who accessed them when. Okay. I'll just pause it and answer some questions if you guys have any. Okay, so what we did there to restrict access to a specific folder, we can do this without modifying the main configuration file of Apache every time. So this is called a directory override. So by default, Apache doesn't listen for directory overrides. We have to tell it to listen to these overrides. So we just have to modify the configuration file once and tell Apache to listen to these directory overrides, and then every time we want to password protect a directory, we can just add a specific file to that directory to let Apache know that this needs to be password protected. So let's go back to our Ubuntu image. Yes?
I need to see this.
Sorry?
I need to see this.
Okay, I'll be there in 1 second. So what we'll do is open up Vim. We're going to VI into httpd.conf. Okay, and we're looking for the directory directive that points to our web root. So I'm going to do /directory and just keep going until I get to the one that says directory /user/local /apache2/htdocs. So that's a directive that points to our web root. And what we want to do is look for the Allowoverride Directive. So this says whether or not you can override directives inside directories by using an htaccess file. So at the moment, none is listed there. But what we want to do is say which directives can be overridden in these htaccess files. So let's just say all for now. So instead of none, change that to all. So again, we're looking for allow override inside the web root directory container. Just change that to all. So this tells Apache to listen to directory overrides. So what we need to do now is save this guy, quit. So WQ says it's been written, and let's restart Apache. Okay, we've successfully restarted Apache. So what we're going to do now is we'll create one more directory that we also want to restrict. We'll call this one maybe private. So let's go to our web root, cd htdocs. So let's make a directory. We'll call this one private. Okay, and again, we'll go into private and just make a sample index file so we know that we're in this directory. The way I'm going to make this index file is just echo out this location is also private into index.html. If we ls, you can see index.html is there. And let's just check to see if we can access this folder from our host environment. So we're going to type in private. Okay, so we can indeed access it. So this location is also private. So what we're going to do now is inside private, we're going to create a .htaccess file. So you can create it by using touch or just using vim.htaccess or your favorite text editor. So I'm going to vim.htaccess. Here's my file. And the contents of my htaccess file are identical to the contents of the directory container I wrote inside the configuration file. So same contents. So we're going to insert auth type basic. auth name. So here, private area. So again, auth name is what appears on top of the login box. Auth user file. So here I can use a different user file or the same one that I've created earlier. So let's use the same one. So it's in /user local Apache 2 /conf/.ht users. Okay, and then we require a valid user. Okay, that's all we need. So I'm going to save this. So escape :WQ, save and quit. Let's go back to our private area now and try to access this area. And you see that now it asks us for a password in this private folder. So this is a way that if you don't have admin rights to where Apache is installed, you can still password protect your files on your own web server as long as Apache is listening for these overrides. So we'll try again, Rafael, password. So the same credentials work for this file as well. Okay, any questions about directory overrides? I'll just pause really quickly. So we can control access by asking the user for credentials, or we can also control access based on the origin of the request that we're getting. So let's say you're creating some sort of server that only hosts files for you and your friends at home. You can specify that you can only allow traffic from a certain list of IPs or a certain domain for your server. So let's exit the htdocs config here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find out what the IP address is of our host machine. And we're going to restrict access so that the host machine can't access our a specific portion of our web server. So let's, to find the IP address, you can just run a command prompt in Windows and type in ipconfig. Okay, and we're looking for the wireless, actually no, this is wired. So we're looking for the wired IPv4 address. So it's mine is 10.10.106.123. So I'll write that down for later. 10.10.106.123. Okay, we'll save that IP address. Let's go back into our Apache config. Okay, so I'm going to create one more folder. We'll call this work, let's say. So we'll make a directory, call it work. So inside work, imagine this is some sort of work folder that you only want to share with you and your housemates. So we're going to go into work. I'm going to create a sample index file. So echo, this is restricted. And we'll create an index file. So there's my index file. Let's see if I can access it from my host environment. So this is work. So I can access it. It's not restricted yet. So what we're going to do now is open up Apache's main configuration file. So vim conf httpd.conf. Okay, we're going to go to the bottom of the file. I'm going to hold shift and press G. We're at the bottom of the file. I'm going to create another container. Instead of using directory, now I'm going to use location. So location is going to refer to anytime a specific location is requested on the Apache server. In this case, we want to change the settings of the work location. So there's my directive. Sorry, there's my container. Okay, so inside here, there's a few directives. So I can either allow traffic from a specific IP or domain, or I can deny traffic from a specific IP or domain. So I can allow or deny, and the arguments I can pass to the allow or deny directives can be partial IP address, full IP addresses, IP address with subnet masks to specify a range of IP addresses that you want to allow, or IPv6 addresses even.
So like on a specific network, one VLAN.
That's right, yeah. So you can just access a specific classless domain. So you can put the subnet mask as 255.255.255.0 or /16/24. And that'll allow or deny a range of IP addresses to this specific container. So in this case, we're just going to do one IP address. But before I mention that, so because we can allow from specific locations and deny from specific locations, we also have to specify in which order do we do these things. Do we allow first or do we deny first? Because that makes a difference. If we deny first and the person is in the deny list, but they're also in the allow list, and we allow second, then they can get in. The last one takes priority, right. So there's 3 directives we have to put in here. The first one is the order. So the order in which we allow or deny. So order, allow, deny. So first we're going to allow or deny. Just keep in mind that the argument to the order directive, there's no spaces between allow and deny. It's one word, or it's one argument. Allow, comma, deny, no spaces. You can flip that, deny, and allow as well. So what we want to do is allow from all. So we're going to let everyone access our site, except for deny from, and this is when we're going to put our host environment's IP address. So I've written it down from before. So we have 10.10.106.123. Okay, so I'm going to deny from this address. Again, I can deny from, if I erase this .123, it'll deny from all the IP addresses that have this beginning, 10.10.106. I can also specify a subnet. So if I say .0/24, I can specify that subnet as well. And I can pass more than one argument to this deny list. So let's go back to our specific IP, 123. Okay, I'm going to save and quit. So again, escape WQ to save and quit from Vim. Now I have to restart Apache. Okay, so I've restarted Apache. Now if I go back to my work folder, let's just make sure I got my IP address correct. 10.10.106.123. Just going to pause. So I was looking on the wrong adapter. So this is my actual IP address, 192.168.56.1. So that's the IP address I should put in. So let's go back and just make this visible. So let's go back to my Apache configuration. Let's go back to the bottom. So the actual IP address that I'd like to deny from is 192.168.56.1. Okay, now I'm going to restart Apache. Okay, and if I go back to my host environment and I try work, again it doesn't work.
I'm having the same problem.
You're having the same problems. Okay, let's try and... okay, so the IP address was entered incorrectly. Here's the correct IP address, 192.168.159.1. That's the address I'm entering into my location container. So deny from 192.168.159.1. After I restart Apache, you can see that I don't have permission to access work on this server. Okay, so what we're going to do now is create something called a virtual host. So a virtual host allows us to have many different, you could say like sub-sites on one server. And specifically, we're going to do name-based virtual hosts. So right now, to access our server, we're typing in an IP address inside the address bar the whole time. But the regular internet doesn't work that way. You don't type in an IP address, you type in a domain name, which gets eventually transferred into an IP address through a DNS. But what we can do is we can tell Apache to listen to specific hosts, and whenever someone enters that host or that domain name, we'll point it to a root or a web root where that directory is. So let's first create my site, a folder that we want to create a virtual host for. So I'm going to make a directory, we'll call it my site. Okay, and again, inside my site, I'm going to create a sample index file just to show that I'm inside this my site. So echo my first virtual host into index.html. So here's my index file, so that's working. If I go to my folder and type in my site, you can see my first virtual host pops up. Okay, so the old way of accessing it works. So what we're going to do is, instead of typing in 192.168.159.128, we're going to change it to mysite.local. Okay, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to use some virtual host containers. So let's open up the Apache Config. Okay, so what we want to do here is we can either create these virtual host containers inside the main Apache configuration file, or we can store them separately, because presumably you're going to have many of these sites up and running and testing, so maybe you want to keep all this configuration separate so you don't clutter your configuration file. So Apache has a separate vhost config file. If we search for it inside Vim, just do /h/vhosts. So we're looking for httpd.conf. Okay, so usually this is commented, so I just uncommented it before this class, but usually it looks like this, it's commented. So just remove the hash before this include statement. That'll include an extra configuration file. The include just means, imagine that in this spot where the include statement is, whatever the contents of the include file are get expanded into this area. So instead of,
if you wanted to take something out, you just put a hash in for it.
that's it, yeah. So we're uncommenting this include. So what this does is it includes a file that's located in conf/extra/httpd.vhost.conf. So it's another configuration file. So I'm going to save the changes. Let's do an ls. And you can see there's a folder called extra. If I go into the extra folder, there's a bunch of extra configuration files there. So the one that we're going to be dealing with is the vhost config. So if I modify the vhost config by typing in vim httpd vhosts, I can see a virtual host config file. So yours should have two sample configuration files inside two sample containers, two sample virtual host containers. And the only thing that we really need for our purposes today is just the document root and the server name. You can also put an alias if you like. But what you should do is comment out the existing samples that you have there. They should be uncommented. Two samples, virtual host :80. Just comment those out by putting in hashtags in front of them, and we'll create a new container. So here I'm going to create a virtual host. So the argument to virtual host *:80 is which IP we're listening to and which port. So star means we're listening to all IPs, and :80 is we're listening to port 80. Okay, so whenever we see a request come in from any IP on port 80, what this container will do is it'll check to see what the server name is. So in this case, the server name, let's say I want to call it mysite.local. So it'll check the host argument of the request header and see if mysite.local is inside the request header. And we have to set a document root. So whenever mysite.local is in the request header, where should we send the user? So document root, we're going to send the user to /user/local/apache2/htdocs/mysite. So this is the folder that we've just created. Okay, so those are the only settings we need for now. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to save and quit. And we're going to restart Apache. Okay, so now the virtual host is set. So we have to do one more thing to make this work on our host computer. So now what's going to happen is every time we type in mysite.local into our favorite browser, it's going to point to our Apache server, but first we have to tell our host environment to do that. So there's something called a hosts file, which translates, it's like a local DNS server. It translates local domains into IPs. So first it checks your host file to see if it has a translation. If it's there, it'll use it. So on Windows, let's open up Notepad++. You have to open it up as an administrator because it's a protected file. So we're going to right click here, run as administrator, yes. And we're going to open up the host file. So in Windows, it's in C, Windows, System32, drivers, and the folder isn't even listed here, so you have to type it yourself, etc, so /etc, and inside etc there's a host file. So we're going to open up this host file, and here you can see some sample entries. So what we want to do is we want to type in the IP address of our server. So in this case it's 192.168.159.128. That's the IP address that we want to write. Let's just write it out. So it's 192.168.159.128. Okay, and we want to say which domain name points to that IP. So in this case, mysite.local. Okay? If you have more domains, like let's say you create a bunch of virtual hosts, you can keep appending server names to this list. So you can have another .local. You don't even have to use the .local extension. You can just say my great page, for example. For now, let's just put mysite.local. We're going to save this file. Okay, and then we're going to go back to our favorite browser, and we're going to type in the mysite.local. So the first time it'll ask you, do you mean HTTP? So let's just write that in. So now if I type in mysite.local, it points to the same web root or the same location as if I were typing my server address /mysite. Okay, so you can have as many of these as you like. So again, what happens is the request actually goes to the server, but we've told Windows that whenever you see mysite.local, go to 192.168.159.128. In the headers that you send, there should be a host header that says mysite.local. When Apache gets the request, it checks its vhost config and says, hey, I'm listening to this IP address on port 80. Is the server name mysite.local? If it is, send the user to this location. Okay, so that's what we've done. We've created a virtual host. So when you're developing multiple pages on your own machine, usually it's much faster to put in some virtual hosts. So you can point to all your different pages, and you can have a meaningful name associated with the page instead of an IP address. Okay, let's pause for questions.